Hello everyone, I'm Charna Davis Wiese and welcome to UCF Profiles. Today's show is all about communication. Sometimes disease or disability makes it almost impossible for some people, some children to speak. Now thankfully, new technology and new systems of helping these people and dedicated speech pathologists are making simple conversation a possibility for everybody. Please join me in welcoming my guest today, Dr. Charlotte Harvey. We have so much to talk about.
We do.
But before we even get into this, I want everybody to understand that this is not a rare thing. Having some kind of communication disorder you're going to run into someone in your life probably fairly regularly that can use help or maybe has had help with this.
That's correct. And it starts with the birth of a baby, if the baby's too early or if there's something genetically placed. Something as simple as the chronic ear infections that young children have can create a temporary hearing loss. You have the preschooler who may or may not be developing language or speaking their sounds as clearly as they need to be, the school-ager who is having difficulty breaking the reading code. And it goes right up through adolescence. An individual in a car accident, regardless of age, if you sustain a traumatic brain injury, it can impair your communication.
So it's about, what, 5%?
About 5%.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people when you look at the numbers of people in the country, yes.
So let's break it down because it's more than just one or two things. This encompasses a wide range of problems with communication.
It does indeed, and I think it all depends as you break it down, whether you want to break it down across the lifespan, if you want to look at the early intervention for the child that was born too soon and perhaps too weak and required mechanical ventilation or ECMO systems, and a speech pathologist is there to help right in the neonatal intensive care units. And in fact, it was a speech pathologist who pioneered in the early 1990s many of the changes that have taken place in neonatal units as far as the neonates' exposure to noise in the little isolettes, the slamming of the doors, and the fact that the lights are on all the time. And there's no day or night cycle going on. So it was a speech pathologist who approached this from his own personal experience, who first started neonatal units looking at what is the life environment for the fragile neonate. So we can go from there and we can go to the individual with the traumatic brain injury. And of course, with our military personnel coming back from the war overseas, many of them may have been concussed and not wounded significantly that you could see the problem, but many of them are finding it very hard to come back in and re-engage as they return to civilian life or even return to stateside military duty. And I think our war correspondent Bob Woodward has really done a great favor for the Americans in highlighting the kinds of difficulties that the military personnel are facing when they've survived a traumatic brain injury, and yet suddenly they don't have long-term memory or their short-term memory or their executive function, which is how you plan to do what you're doing. It's not working like it used to, but perhaps the individual does not have a significant level of injury that it becomes an immediate flag. We work also with individuals who have sustained cerebral vascular accidents, CVA, stroke, brain attacks is another word in the common vernacular, and individuals who've lost their ability either to retrieve words for the production of an oral communication, or they've lost their reading skills, their writing skills, they've lost the clarity of their voice or their ability even to produce a voice at all. So we have many, many areas across the lifespan that we can provide services for individuals to help them to recover or help them to gain and learn so that they can engage more fully in their everyday life activities.
You know, you touched on the neonatal unit, and that is just so fascinating to me, how that one person, or how a group of people actually got to the point where they thought, this is happening from the first day of life. Mm-hmm. It was when the child won't be speaking for so many, mm-hmm. many months. How did they get to that point knowing, well, we have to look this far back?
As with so many changes that you see, whether it's in healthcare delivery or any kind of educational delivery, it takes that personal experience. And it was an aha moment. It was Dr. Lou Rossetti who pioneered the changes that were made. And he pioneered those changes as a consequence of his own personal experience with a neonatal intensive care unit. And because of what he saw and because of his recognition as a speech pathologist, he realized that there were so many aspects of the care of the newborn that needed to be changed, and he also addressed the care of the parents and what happens when you have a baby too early or too sick to go home. How do you help that parent move through that, and how do you help that child, that infant, to move through that? So it's a grassroots. Unfortunately, war brings many changes in rehabilitation services. We look at what's happening with prosthetic devices. And as a consequence, even of World War II, we had many changes in our understanding as a field of speech pathology of what constitutes brain injury, what is an aphasia, and then many of the treatments that were supplied were developed in military hospitals. So it all comes back to the person, and it all comes back to the person wishing to make a difference, and we have the freedom to be able to do that in this country. So we have a couple of constellations of stars coming together, if you would. So it can make a difference.
And it's fascinating to me that you really have to think about the whole child and all of the surroundings and how that affects how they'll be able to communicate and talk later. And also children and the way they're raised, their childhood, their early years could probably really affect whether or not they have problems, or whether or not they have problems that are missed.
My students laugh at me because I'm not a big one in terms of electronic games for kids who are younger than 5. I'm of the belief that your brain is the battery for the toy. I'm of the belief, being an early interventionist back to the mid-1970s, that it's what you do in your mind that oftentimes helps that child to develop. And I think it's unfortunate that so many parents fall for the toy that is going to put their child educationally advanced, when the simplicity of it is, it's the communication. It's the give and take, it's the turn taking, it's the use of language, it's the taking the time with the child that really makes the difference and really helps to develop the initial communication strategies.
And this goes across all socioeconomic levels, because this could be the highest level, most educated people, and the least educated people could be doing the same thing.
Yes, yes. Yes, and yes again. I can't say it firmly enough, because it really doesn't matter how much you have or how little you have. It all comes down to relating to that child and taking the time to communicate with them. The younger the child, the more sensitive you have to be to what they're doing in terms of their body language. And you have to read that body language, and you have to offer to the child what it is you think they may be saying, and then reading back the cues that come back in from them. So it doesn't matter who you are.
You know what I see as a mom a lot is so many parents tune them out. You know, their kids will be talking to them or asking them questions, and it's like later, 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 later. And I think that's part of the communication as well.
It is very much so, and it also goes beyond the communication. I think it addresses the bonds that you need to make with your child. It also takes a look at what the child needs at a particular point in their life as far as the kinds of guidance and input that they get. And parents, whether they realize it or not, they're the king and the queen of their child's life, and the parent is the expert on the child. And if they are taking the time to learn who their child is, then they have a much richer, much fuller life with that child.
And enjoy it while they think you're the greatest thing in the world. Enjoy that while that lasts.
Yeah, it may not last long, but yes, do enjoy it. You're totally right.
And then I see things like with my youngest. He has problems with his R's, and everybody I've talked to, oh, it's fine. He's going to grow out of it, and that'll be fine. But he's 8 years old, and the parent actually has to take it upon themselves, because now just asking you, I probably should have called somebody else, gone outside of the school, gone outside of the pediatrician's office, and spoken to somebody who's an expert in it, because he probably needs some help with that.
I would suggest to you that you do consult with a speech-language pathologist about it, because at 8 years of age that R should be fairly normal in production, and at this point in time it's habituated as an incorrect production.
And it's many, many children. That's why I'm bringing it up, because there'll probably be some parents listening right now, and it's amazing how many of them. Yeah. And R seems to be very common.
R is a hard sound. It's one of our glide sounds, and there's no real landmarks within your mouth that say, oh, unlike a T or a T, where you put your tongue tip up, etc. With the R, it's tuned with your ears, if you would, and then you modify with the tongue base, and the larynx. It's a very, very challenging sound to teach a child.
When I was in 2nd grade, I remember distinctly that they came to class and they had us do tongue twisters. And they picked out those of us, I was one of them, who needed to go for speech therapy. That's not done anymore. So the parents really have to be on top of it.
The parents do, and again, they are their child's advocate. And it is up to the parent to be able to speak on behalf of their child and what they perceive as needs. One of the things that I've learned in being a speech pathologist, and I've been in the profession at 30 years at this point in time, is that when a parent says to me something isn't right with my child's communication, that parent is right. They may not have the words, they may not have the educational diagnosis, but you know parents, they sit and they look at their child and they look at the neighbor's child, and they notice differences. And I have learned and tried to teach the students that we teach at our clinic, you have to listen to the parents, because when they sense that there is something that is not going well for their child or going right, you have to pay attention, and then you have to help to discover what it is that will help that child with their communication.
Because there are consequences educationally as well. I've been lucky because it hasn't affected his spelling or his reading, but I'm sure in a lot of cases a child might think that this particular word has a W in it, or if there's a problem with S's or something like that.
You're correct. What we call phonemic awareness develops well before the child ever goes to kindergarten, and there are screening tools that are available for use with kids as early as 4 years of age, where you can get a sense of what the child can do at an almost totally abstract level with the sounds that they hear. If what they produce isn't matching what they're hearing in the outside environment, it sometimes can be very troublesome and very problematic for the child then to move not only to speak intelligibly and communicate a need, but then to move it to print base, where they're producing a word and they're understanding what those sounds mean as you group them together.
We will be right back. We have so much more to talk about with Dr. Charlotte Harvey. Don't go away.
Attendance, people, listen up. Albertson.
Here.
Barnes.
Here.
Swain.
Here.
Reyes.
Here.
Perez.
Here.
Clark.
Here.
Gerbic.
Here.
Sellers.
Here.
Nguyen.
Here.
Tomei.
Here.
And Miller.
Here.
In our classrooms and throughout our community, UCF stands for opportunity.
We're back. We're talking with Dr. Charlotte Harvey about communication disorders, and suddenly this has appeared. I really want to mention this because this hard hat has appeared, and that's very important to you. Tell me about the hard hat.
This hard hat was provided to me as a remembrance token, if you would, when we completed the renovations of our clinic in the Research Parkway. And this was in 2003 that we completed it. All of our clinical team and staff signed the hard hat. We had an under $300,000 project that we brought in under budget, which
is amazing for a clinic.
It is amazing. It is amazing. And we kept operational with our full complement of clients and our graduate and undergraduate clinicians in this whole process. And at the end of it, the clinical faculty, clinical team surprised me with the hard hat, because I was the one that was in charge at the clinic level for helping to, I don't know, magistrate, if you would, or orchestrate might be a more elegant word, all the things that needed to be done to keep operational and keep safe.
And you know, just being able to run that during a renovation, anyone who's renovated anything in their house knows what a mess that could be. You deserved probably more than this.
Well, I was joking with someone that during the whole process, it was one big elaborate dance of working with the contractor and working with the different faculty members and moving ahead to make sure that all the client needs and all the clinical needs for the students were met. It was fun. It's done. I really don't want to have to do it again, but it's done.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. You know, back to what we were talking about with early intervention and the children. Some people may not be able to afford a speech pathologist. Is there anything a mother or a father or even an older sibling can do to help a child that's having some kind of speech problem?
I'm glad that you've asked about that. There are a number of things that the family can do. First and foremost is to get the consultation, to get the original diagnostics done with the child, so you know exactly the source of the problem, or you know the nature of the symptomatology. So you make sure
it's maybe the way they're talking and not that they're having a hearing loss.
Correct. Correct. So you do what we call differential diagnosis. You identify what the need is, you identify the consequences in the child's communication development, and then the family can, if they're able to afford it, engage in therapy services for the child. If they're not, then very often speech pathologists will work with families in a consultative manner and develop programs for the families to use, so that you're not at a high frequency level economically, but you're still keeping the integrity of a program. There's a bonus in the state of Florida, and in fact across the United States, with a program that's now called Early Steps in Florida, and it is for children who are between the ages of birth, which is an age, and 3 years, in which the federal government and the state, through Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, will provide some support for therapeutic services to help that child to gain or recover the skills that they need for an early start in communication. You also have, with the public school programs in the 3 to 5 years, you have some Part B programs. At the Communication Disorders Clinic at UCF, we provide services to families within the community. They are the source of our clinical population for our clinicians, our graduate students for clinical practice. I have a caseload that I supervise at the clinic, and you work with the parents, you work with the children, you work with the clinicians. So there's a number of ways that families can go ahead and help their children and not feel economically strapped if they're able to take advantage of the resources.
Tell me about your first client. We have a photograph of your first client, but this is not what he looked like when he was your first client.
No, Charna, this is not what he looked like when he was my first client. He is my cousin, and he is younger than I am by 3 months. I laugh about this because I've reminded him he was my first client. In the summer when we were 6.5 going on to 7, he lived in the city, in the big city. I lived in the country, in the small country. He came and stayed with us for 3 months, but he had difficulty in breaking the reading code. My charge...
And for those of us who don't know what that means, breaking the reading code
He couldn't learn how to read.
He couldn't learn to read, okay.
He could not learn how to read because of a dyslexia. And he came and stayed with us, and because we were so close in age, we played together, fishing together, and so on. He was wonderful because he would be very patient as we sat down 5 mornings a week and read from his book for 15 minutes before we could go outdoors and go fishing or play catch.
How did you know that's what you needed to do? Is it instinctive? I mean, you are in the position you need to be in. You knew instinctively as a child what to do?
No, I won't quite confess to having an instinct that early. I knew it was important because his mother, my aunt, had taken me aside and said to help Jimmy learn to read, you can help him because you can read. And we were both in the same grade in school, and I had been successful in cracking the reading code and learning how to read, and he was still struggling. So she took me aside and she said, would you please do this 5 mornings a week through the summer for 15 minutes. And of course, I loved my aunt and I loved my cousin, and I was afraid that he wouldn't learn to read, so we did it. And he was very patient.
It's amazing that kids really, you followed through. That's amazing.
It astounds me, and we spoke about it a few years ago, and he said, you know, I always wondered why you insisted that we sit down and read before we go out and play. And I said, well, now you know, your mom asked me to do that. And apparently my mother and his mother, who were sisters, were together on this. And he said, well, I think it helped me learn to read. So he was my first client.
That's what we call in our family a mother's diabolical plan.
That's exactly right.
Something like that. So was that when you knew? When you saw that success with him, was that when you knew this is what you would end up doing?
No, it really wasn't. It really wasn't. I have a bachelor's degree in English and secondary education.
Really?
So it came to me very late in life. I was 24 years of age when I went to graduate school in speech pathology and audiology because I realized I really wanted to work on a one-on-one basis with people, that I knew I could make a difference, that there was something about my ability to relate to people and to understand, that I really wanted to go ahead and to learn the skills that went with it. So we're talking the 1970s, and we're talking speech pathology is very low on the radar screen of most people. I used to informally work with some of my coworkers when I was working in a non-educational setting, and these were non-native speakers of English, and we were working on their articulation. So that's when I realized that I liked what I was doing, and that was important to me, to like what I was doing. And then I sought the education to go with it.
Some of the other things that you do is work with adults with communication disorders. Granted,
Yes.
the early intervention is incredibly important, but sometimes, like you said, an injury, a disease, or maybe somebody who has had something their whole life and as an adult really can use some help.
And there are, with the advances and the decreasing cost of devices, assistive technology. And assistive technology takes many forms. It's not just a device that can flip the heat on in your house or control the air conditioning. Assistive technology is also augmentative communication. And it is important because the technology will allow the person who is no longer able to verbally communicate, it allows the person to continue as normal as possible in their communications with their family, their loved one, their caregivers that are health caregivers, perhaps even in their employment setting. So technology is available, and many of our adults in the communication disorders clinic do use assistive technology, specifically communication devices. So it's wonderful to see the adults move into this and move through it.
What does that physically look like? We see them on television in dramas where there'll be a computer screen and they can touch it or even just look at it. If I don't know if that really happens or that's just on television.
It's the real deal. You can have an infrared device that is actually placed in the center of the forehead. It's a little tiny dot. It looks like a dot. And the infrared can be read by the technology device. You also have the direct touch, in which the individual can touch the screen and string together communications. So what you're seeing on television is the real deal. And fortunately for us, people like Stephen Hawking has made folks aware that even though you may have neurologic breakdown or you may have something that has happened to you that keeps you from communicating verbally, you can continue to communicate. And he has been prolific, particularly in the use of his device in communicating. And I think he probably brought technology to the average person in that manner, even just through news clips, certainly.
And it's so huge. It's so huge. I remember when my mom started to lose her hearing, and she was, from what I understand, quite typical and denied it. And when it got worse, she was so removed from what was going on around her. And I'm sure it's the same thing when you can speak and communicate with somebody else. The entire psyche, the entire social aspect, your entire life, you become so isolated from everybody that it's more than just being able to say, get me a glass of water, or I need my shoes over there.
Right. You're referring to the human suffering that comes with the difficulty in communicating, and we're talking about the ability to express your needs or express the thoughts about your granddaughter's prom dress. But more than that, in your reference to the hearing loss, a hearing aid is assistive technology, just as the glasses I'm wearing is assistive technology. And to take advantage of all of the devices and the aids that are available to us is so critical in order to allow the person to realize their fullest potential. I believe that after 30 years of practice that you have to take advantage of what's available.
It's there for you.
It is.
With many kinds of physical therapy, it's tiny little increments and very small things, or a big celebration for walking, or just as an example. With speech, is it the same thing, or is there a big eureka moment? I seem to remember when I was doing I could not say SHs or CHs for the life of me. I couldn't say my own name. And I have this memory, whether it happened or not, in second grade, that I said my name right. Just, it was kind of like in ballet when you learn to spin, and you work, and something happens almost seemingly magically, even though you put a lot of work into it. Is it both? Does it both happen with that?
It happens, yes, both happens, and it is a eureka moment. It's an aha, it's the gestalt, it's coming together, but we also celebrate all the milestones along the way with all of our clientele or our patients, that each step forward in communication, whether it is verbally, vocally, assistively, or in understanding, every step forward is a step ahead to that point when that person is going to realize their goals.
Dr. Charlotte Harvey, thank you so much. With all these shows, we always run out of time, and I have 1,000 other questions in my head, so you'll have to promise me you'll come back one day.
Thank you, I will.
Thanks for joining us, and thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the next UCF Profiles.